There it goes. Got it. All right, thank you. And thank you all for coming. And looks like a very nice turnout tonight. My name is Greg Nemitz, and this is my wife, Sarah Sawyer. And we are parents of Ella Nemitz, who's a sixth grader at EB. And Ella is diagnosed with ADHD, and she's been at EB for her entire school career. For those of you who are new to this group, we are really happy that you've joined us. Over the last couple of years, we've been organizing a couple of Zoom chats and panels all about neurodiversity and learning differences. The panels have essentially been focused on people who study neurodiversity, different elements of neurodiversity, and people who are helpers and who assist. But we always wanted to do this kind of a panel, which is to actually speak with people who have lived the journey and walked the walk. And so what we've done is we've assembled a diverse group of three people who are at various stages of their lives and various stages of neurodiversity.
And we are fortunate to have three gracious guests who are at very distinct stages of their journey. Our first panelist this evening is an EB alum who some of you might know. Her name is Isabel Ross. She is currently a sophomore at Tulane, and she has been diagnosed with ADHD. Our second panelist, also an EB alum, Aiden Myers, is a junior at St. Mary's High School. And I've heard that he is an incredibly gifted hockey player. So we're anxious to hear more about that. And our third panelist is Becky Hambright, who's currently a consulting manager at the Permanente Medical Group and a holder of not one, but two master's degrees from UC Berkeley. And Becky's been diagnosed with ADHD. We want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. Thank you so much. Milan Zadau, who all of you probably know, our middle school counselor and our high school placement coordinator, will be moderating the conversation tonight. If you have questions, just go ahead and throw them in the chat and we'll be happy to answer them at the end of the panel this evening for the Q&A. So without further ado, we're going to let Milan kick it off and we'll see you on the other side.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Sarah and Greg, for inviting me here this evening to be a part of this whole panel and to also ask me to moderate the panel. I was actually very excited to do so because I know Aiden and Isabel quite well from their time at EB. And then I also got the chance to meet Becky, and it's been a pleasure to work closely with all of you through the process. I also want to thank there's many members here of the SST team from EB that are here that I may just mention the name, which is the student support team at EB, and that's Carla. Maybe if you could just raise your hand. I said it's Carla Maya. I'm sorry, I'm saying your name. And then we have Emily, who is also the English coordinator, and Benedict. I think she's still here. Benedict, yeah, is there on. And then Elodie is going to be here shortly, who is the French coordinator. And then Chrissy Greer, who is the Dean of Students at the middle school, is unfortunately unable to attend this evening. I would also like to thank Gael, who really took leadership in helping us throw together the panel, communicating with everybody, bringing us together. So thank you, Gael. So why don't I start by, I'm going to ask each of the panelists a series of questions, and then have each of you respond, and then afterwards to turn it over to the participants who want to ask some specific questions. And I think those will go, as Sarah and Greg were saying, into the chat. So I'm not quite sure who had order. Maybe I could start. I don't know if I can start with Aiden and then work from like the youngest up. So maybe the first question I'm going to ask is for the whole panel is, when did you notice that you learned differently from your peers? Maybe if that's the first question. And if Aiden, you're not quite ready, you could always pass to like Isabel or Becky.
I think I can answer that. think I noticed I always felt a little different in the classroom, but I think I remember noticing when notes, like note taking, started becoming more prevalent. So like fourth, fifth grade, because I was always either behind on notes or I'd be writing and I wouldn't be paying attention because I'd be trying to catch up with my notes, and I would just kind of not understand material because of I wrote slower, so I wouldn't be able to pay as much attention to what was going on. And I think that was when I really started thinking about me being a little different than everyone else.
And what age were you? I'm sorry, I don't know if you said. I
Fourth grade, I was.
was like fourth grade. Okay, or fourth grade,
Yeah.
grade.
Yeah, I don't remember my exact age, but around fourth grade, yeah.
Fourth grade. Okay, great. And maybe I can move on to Isabel. You wanna-
Yeah, I think for me, it wasn't until I got to high school that it really hit me that I didn't learn in quite the neurotypical way. And it wasn't even I wasn't the one who thought of it, not even my parents. I had a history teacher who was also my advisor, and he approached me about talking to the school counselor about getting tested for a learning disability. He had noticed that I was struggling academically, but I was putting in the work. And I hadn't really even thought about the possibility of it, quite honestly, just because clearly it's changed, but it wasn't really ever something that was talked about at EB. And I've also dealt with mental health issues in the past that have affected my work. So it was never something that crossed mine or my parents' mind. And I also think because ADHD is stereotypically recognized more as hyperactivity and also impulsiveness, and in girls, it's a little different, but that's not really something that's recognized, and it's not something I knew about. So it was about sophomore year of high school, I think.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Isabel. And that's what, and also the fact for you, all of you on the panel, is helping to bring more awareness. Like you were saying, when you were at EB, you didn't have that awareness. And that's one of our purposes now, is to really make people aware of what to look for, and so they can get help sooner with that. And I'm going to go ahead with Becky for the.
Yeah, I think in hindsight, and now that I'm almost 50, elementary school is a long time ago. So, but I would say I think high school is when I started to notice that I was working as hard or harder than my peers for the same outcomes. And I also started to notice some behavior, kind of like what at the time I thought were maybe just personality flaws, but now I know differently, procrastination, and just almost just not wanting to do the work, even though at one point I was really excited about it. But I would say it was definitely more in college, when the academic environment was less structured, that I really knew that I was struggling.
Okay, great. Thank you. So maybe I'll go on to the next question. It's a little bit of an open question, maybe you could respond to, though. Is what were you like as a kid? And I know for Aiden, you might still feel like a kid because you're young, but maybe thinking even back to even the fourth and fifth grade, in conjunction with your learning difference.
Yeah, I think as a kid, it's not that long ago for me, but when I was younger, I really liked history and war and all that, and I liked learning, but I don't think I liked school as much, which is a little strange. But now that I think back about it, it's because it was harder for me. But I was active, and I enjoyed learning about things outside of school, but I didn't enjoy school until recently, where I started being able to address things that were more difficult for me.
So you noticed a shift as you started to once you were diagnosed and getting the supports that would accommodate for.
Yeah. I think before I had been diagnosed, or before I talked to teachers about it, school was just kind of like just a task. I couldn't really enjoy it because I was so busy trying to just get by that I wasn't being able to actually process or experience any enjoyment of any of the material that I was learning.
Great. Thank you, Aiden. I'll move on to Isabel.
As a kid, I was pretty shy, but I'd never really struggled socially. That was a good foundation I had. But I did have a lot of trouble advocating for myself, particularly in academic settings. And that's something even through high school I really struggled with. And I also tended to not express my emotions, when I was younger, which I also think could have contributed to my late diagnosis, because there were definitely things I noticed that I just didn't know how to communicate. The one thing I do remember as a student at EB was teachers always had good things to say about me, and they said I couldn't shut up. And I remember Benedicte said that as well to my parents. That's a memory I have. So I like talking to my friends. And I was pretty observant as a kid, a good listener, I think. And I was also a big reader when I was younger, and I loved to draw. And that's something I would hyper focus on for hours at a time. And I've just been I was a huge people pleaser when I was younger as well. And again, like that goes back to not being able to advocate for myself and not knowing how to communicate it, because I didn't want to disappoint anyone around me or inconvenience them in any way.
And have you, since the diagnosis, you feel like that you've changed? I mean,
Yes, definitely.
outside it definitely seems like it, but
Yeah, because it put a label on it. And I think also that was just a part of growing up. And there comes a point where you need to stand up for yourself, and you need to put yourself in uncomfortable situations and face confrontation, even if it's something you hate, because you can't navigate life without doing that.
Great. Thank you, Isabel. And I'm going to go over to Becky. I don't know how far back you want to go with talking about.
This response will be pretty brief, and I'll just say very similar to Isabel. I was super talkative. Like I remember people telling me, like my family, I'm the youngest of 4, and just constantly being in the back seat and everyone just going, shut up, Becky. And just lots of ideas, lots of thoughts, but really compliant. Like I also people pleaser. So, and similarly, like from a gender perspective, I think that the ADHD was missed in part because the way that girls present and that uber compliance. And so, and I think I have more hyperactivity than inattentive, but yet still I was really compliant.
Okay. I wanted to ask just for Aiden, just going with the questions without getting picked up with just the gender, is how were you it come across with you in 4th or 5th grade? Who noticed that you needed an evaluation?
I don't know if it was in 4th or 5th grade when I had this testing. I don't really remember what when the testing was, but it was a therapist I had who realized originally, like Kaiser, or I think it was Kaiser, thought I had like a like depression or some side of like some form of depression, I think, and they want to give me medications for depression to try to fix or resolve what my difficulties were. But it was a therapist I had that realized that it wasn't depression. It was I was struggling, and so I was frustrated. I came home frustrated a lot, and I'd just be kind of angry. And it was because my mind was working so hard that, like, just to try to act normal or be normal and just kind of conform to what was going on, that I'd come home and I'd just be kind of upset and just angry all the time.
Okay. Well, good. Yeah, thank you, Aiden. So I'm going to go on to the next question. So what does it feel like to live with your learning difference? And it's okay just to go ahead and continue in the same order with Aiden? Do you want to?
Yeah, I can go first again. I think it's hard to explain, because most of the time it doesn't really affect me. And I'm able to just kind of, act as someone that doesn't have learning hindrances as I do. But I think where it actually shines through is like memorization actually is a part of like the neurodiversity. Like I can memorize things really well where other people can't, and that's always been like a plus for me. But it's just, it feels off when I'm trying to write down things or I'm trying to read notes or whatever. It just feels like kind of like I don't fit, like I'm weird. And that's just what I felt when I was younger, I think.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I can go on to Isabel.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the biggest struggles is just maintaining my attention. And I think at times it can come off as I'm not listening or I don't care to listen. So that's something I've definitely worked on over the past 5 years. And I also have diagnosed OCD, which after getting diagnosed with ADHD, I actually realized they share a lot of similar symptoms, which was interesting. And so that both contribute to my inattention and tendency to be late. And I also think both contribute to a crippling problem with it, like making any sort of decision, big or small. This was more of an issue when I was younger. But I take medication for both now, and I understand the hesitancy towards it, especially with parents and their children. But personally, for me, it's been pretty life-changing. So.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Isabel. And I'm going to go on to Becky. With the
So
same.
the question being, how does it feel? And I would say it depends on the day
Mhm.
and the context of my day. So when I'm doing things that are where I'm in flow and it's like a good fit with my superpowers, it's amazing because I really excel at certain things, strategic thinking, and I'm super creative and I'm a super fast thinker. So I feel celebrated and I actually feel special because of what I think are superpowers connected to my ADHD. And then other times I would say overwhelming and frustrating and sometimes sad a little bit, just because I've spent a good chunk of my life operating in institutions like the school system that I grew up in that was organized and created for someone else. And so I kind of went through a lot of my life thinking that there was something wrong with me when it was really that I was fine. I was just not in a system that was made for me. So I think it depends on the day and the context for sure.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear the similarities and how all of you have adapted and seen your strengths and within your diagnosis. And that kind of leads to my next question. So I think I already covered the part about how did you find out about your diagnosis, but the other part of that question is how did you respond? Like once you did get the diagnosis. I don't know if you want me to continue with you. Then I can work.
I mean,
that way down.
if anyone else wants to share first, they're welcome to, but I can keep going.
Okay.
I think for a while, even after I knew that it was like making it harder for me to learn, I didn't want my parents to talk to the school, it was the middle school when I got diagnosed with dysgraphia. And I didn't want to talk to anyone because I didn't want to be a burden, essentially, have to have anyone change anything for me, because it felt like a burden. And then eventually, I let my parents talk to the school and it all changed for the better, actually. But for a while, it just felt kind of like I wanted to hide it because it made me weird or strange.
What happened that allowed you that you felt like you did want the school to know, and then you and could accept help?
I was talking to, I think, another therapist, and just trying to convince me, just like you're not gonna be weird. Your peers aren't gonna think of you as strange or anything like that. And I think finally I was kind of like, okay, like you can talk to them, and I was like, fine, whatever. And so they did, but then I had conversations with teachers about it. I had conversations with, I think, advisors at the school, and it all changed for the better. Really, just made it easier.
And I have one little question in the chat too about people don't know what dysgraphia is.
Oh yeah, sorry. Dysgraphia is it's difficult to describe. It's like for me, I struggle with writing neatly, but I also struggle with kind of writing and thinking at the same time, I'd say. So I can only do one or the other, so I can't really do it that fast. And I don't know exactly what the description is, but for me, it's always just been kind of like writing is strenuous and it makes me tired, or it strains my thoughts because I have to focus on it so hard.
And what do you do then to what kind of accommodations would you?
My accommodations in middle school were I just type basically everything other than math, because it's hard to type math. in a computer, iPad, or whatever, but I type basically everything from like essays, obviously, to vocab tests, to like art write-ups, anything really that needed to be written, I would talk to the teacher and say, can I type this instead? And they always said yes. I mean, and then, you know, I got more time on standardized tests, but yeah, just stuff like that.
Okay. And usually something like the voice recognition software too.
I think I could have used that. I never did really, because it always I would say stuff and then it would type it wrong and I'd have to correct it anyway. So it just felt faster. Like my brain could connect with my hands when I was typing, and I could type while I thought, and it wouldn't be, you know, like it wouldn't slow me down.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Aiden. So I'm going to go on to Isabel for like, how did you respond when you got the ADHD diagnosis?
Yeah, when I got my diagnosis, I think immediately it was just very clarifying and validating to
Mhm.
finally put a name to it after, because even though I mean, I was still a kid, obviously, and I mean, Becky also was diagnosed a lot later, so that's a whole nother thing. But compared to anyone I knew, they had all been diagnosed very young, and so it was honestly like just a big sigh of relief, I think. And I was also at the age where I could myself figure out a plan of action forward. Like I was the one who reached out to my school about it to get accommodations. And I think also I was lucky enough to go to a high school that didn't, you know, they made a great effort to get rid of the stigma around learning differences. And so after I had already been going for about a year, and so it was a very normal thing for teachers and kids to talk about. And so I also think that was a luxury I had that a lot of kids don't, because I didn't feel like I'd been labeled as like different, or I felt like I was outcast socially, obviously, because it was something that was so normalized. But yeah, I think just the big word would be relief.
Great. Thank you, Isabel. And then I'll go on to Becky with that same
Yeah,
question.
so I was diagnosed about 5 years ago, and I think I had known for some time, like I was pretty clear, maybe even like 5 years before that. And a large part of that is because my mom had been diagnosed like 25 years ago, and I thought that was her thing, not my thing. But I have 8 nieces and nephews, and only all of them have ADHD except for 2. So all the cousins, and then including my own children, all of them have ADHD. And then the 2 that don't, one of them is my daughter. And so it's like so dramatic, the difference between like my daughter and my husband and my son and I. I tend to think my son and I are a lot more fun, but we don't tell them that. But I just like that insight, and but the response right afterwards, I think I had some regret that I didn't get a diagnosis earlier, and seek support, and that I just was like grinding, you know, and so some regret, but also it really kind of opened up a whole world to me. Just like I dove into like podcasts and books. I saw a therapist who specifically focused on ADHD diagnosis for adults, particularly processing some of the things I'd been telling myself for 45 years that weren't true. So I needed to kind of like backtrack some of that. But positive, yeah.
Okay.
Overall.
Okay, good. Thank you. Becky, and I'll go on to the next question then, is how does your learning difference affect your journey academically, professionally, and socially? I guess if you want to speak to how that, to where what your situation is now. And you want me to start again with Aiden? Is that?
You want to flip the order?
Yeah, go ahead. I
just
wanted to
go
go
ahead.
with you, Becky, because you're there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's right.
Academically, professionally, and socially. So, yeah, academically, I think just it was challenging for me because all of through school, I was struggling, but didn't really know why. So, but I was really determined. And I had been told my whole life that I was smart. So I had this like, well, I can do this. Like, I want to study, and I applied, and I kind of had workarounds. And that's one of the things I learned when I got diagnosed. I did a battery of tests, and the psychologist that did the testing said, your symptoms are pretty severe, but you effectively, like, the actual impact on your daily functioning is relatively low, because I had naturally kind of, with my creativity and my fast mind, created all these workarounds. So, so professionally, I think, again, just, and I can talk a little bit more about that. I know there's another question that I have prepared a succinct answer for, but really just trying to focus on, where do I have flow? Where do I have fit? And socially, I'm not sure. I think in hindsight, the hyperactivity, I think I'm a better listener now, and I will pause more because of the hyperactivity. I'm quick to, like, with ideas, or but I don't know that socially it's impacted me dramatically per se.
Thank you, Becky. And I guess I'll go in reverse order down to Isabel.
Yeah, I think I would agree with Becky that socially is the one aspect of those three that it hasn't really impacted me in any way that I've had to work around it. But academically is where I've noticed it the most. And I think for me, that translates to not being able to engage in material that isn't stimulating for me. But then on the flip side, I'm able to really throw myself into work I love and go above and beyond, and I want to. But I think I've learned the importance of writing everything down, using a planner religiously. I need to. And I also plan my days out. And I think I've also learned to accept the way that I need to study is going to be different than most of my peers. And I think that's something that I struggled with for a bit. And because I would see them cramming for an exam or writing a 10-page paper in 2 hours, and I felt like I had to do the same. But once I accepted that that wouldn't work for me, I could focus my time on actually developing strategies that help with my own personal academic success. And I think also it affects me academically in terms of, I don't know, I never have doubted my intelligence. And so prior to my diagnosis, it was never something where I felt like I'm not as smart. It was just that the strategies that were given to me weren't meant to work for the way my brain processes information. So I think post-diagnosis, once I was able to figure that out, it's not something that necessarily is impacting me academically super negatively. It's just I have to go about it differently.
Yeah. Okay. Could I see so many similarities with Becky too? Because I talked with Becky before. Could I ask before I go to Aiden, Becky? Could you said something when we met last week, and it reminds me of what Isabella is saying, that you became super organized, that you realized you had to because you couldn't do things the way that others. I don't know if you want to speak to that right now or come back to it, but it was just
I'm happy to.
You're saying.
Some of those workarounds, like it, I almost, like, people that I work with or people that I go to school with think I'm the most organized person in the room. When in reality, I guess maybe I am, but I had to kind of become, I have all these systems. I have lists about my lists, and I have Post-its everywhere, and I plan out my whole week. I have, like, I call it my integration time. I just have to sit quiet on a Saturday morning and drinking my coffee and just kind of like look at my week and reflect upon it, and I'll remember things. And I know many people do that, and you know, but it's a requirement where I if I'm not organized, including my physical space, I get it, I'm prone to more distraction. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Becky, because it just seems so similar to what Isabel
Yeah.
was sharing.
Totally resonating.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah, and then so Aiden, I'm going to go back to you then with the question is how does the learning difference affect your journey academically, professionally, and socially? So that's the question I just asked you.
I think I agree with both the other panelists where socially it hasn't really affected me like at all. But like academically it's been every class I've ever taken.
Mhm.
In essence, I mean, from art to English, like any kind of fine motor skills, I should have described that earlier, but dysgraphia is also, I have an issue with fine motor skills, meaning writing, connecting blocks even, I think it was one time, but so like painting to writing, it's always been just challenging. But I think then like getting through that and like getting to a point where I have these accommodations, it's been like it's opened up a whole new world for me, because whereas I used to hate writing, I love writing, like typing. And I think it's opened up like mathematically. I used to struggle a lot with algebra just because of I don't know, I guess I didn't have the background, but now like I don't have to take constant notes, so I can actually pay attention to what they're saying. And I get copies of teachers' notes, and I think that's one thing that my high school does really well is teachers sharing notes. And I don't know, I think it's opened up just kind of a whole new branch for me, of just enjoyment of what I do now.
Good. Thank you, Aiden. And for the next question, I'm going to go back to Becky and start with you again. And then I know there's some questions in the chat. I have a couple more questions to ask the panelists, and then I'll get to the questions that are in the chat. So for Becky, in hindsight, if you could go back and talk to your younger self, what advice would you give yourself or your parents or your teachers? Like, yeah.
So I think for me, it's more advice for myself. And with the awareness that I have now, I think it's really just like, but if I could go back and say, you have ADHD, and I also haven't mentioned that I've self-diagnosed myself with dysgraphia, and when I did the assessment, he said there's a couple other things going on, but that's a whole other set of tests. And at this point, I'm 45 and I'm not going back to school for sure. That I'm like, I kind of let that go, but specifically with like being a poor speller and some of those issues, I think I've struggled like at work where I'm chart padding and doing facilitation, and I'm stressed the whole time because I can't spell. Or I'm flipping letters, or, and now I laugh, I just straight up say, I have some learning differences. And so I'm going to write things that don't look like you're not going to recognize them the same way I write them. And I use humor. So I have this like total humor and self-acceptance. And I like take the opportunity to say, to really just own that, yeah, certain things are harder for me, but I'm also really, really great at other things. And so I would say acceptance, and really just like owning the fact that I need to do things a different way, and that's totally okay. And even feeling like I can share that with other people. And then also just really looking for my superpowers. I wish I would have thought about it that way, or like I had that insight earlier, because that's been really empowering for me to help balance that out, and also accepting that. So it wasn't like I didn't see what my strengths were earlier, but I was so focused on the things that were hard that I couldn't see them, or they outweighed the things that were hard, outweighed the superpowers. And then I think just all of the Aiden and Isabel talk about the accommodations and various things. And I would say in my context, just like really trying resources and keep trying resources. And if one thing doesn't work, it doesn't mean something else won't be helpful. And just kind of staying at it, because over time I feel like I have all these tools now and ways of thinking about things that really help over time.
Wow, thank you, Becky. That was very inspirational, and even helping all of us with how to approach, with our learning. So maybe I could go to Isabel, if you can answer that same question, looking back at your younger self?
Yeah, I
You're
think
quite young already.
I guess for my much younger self, I think that at the time I felt like every little decision was going to be the end of the world, but I wish I could tell myself to just take a moment, not panic in situations that really scared or frustrated me. And I think I would also tell myself that even though the anxiety that both my ADHD and OCD that I had as a child, especially, it won't disappear, but I'll figure out how to manage it, and I'll find tools and figure it out on my own. And it'll take a while, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And I think also that I would tell myself that the feeling I had for a long time that something was a little off was right. And I don't mean off in the way that something was objectively wrong with me, because there isn't, but just that my brain is wired differently. And now that I know that, there are so many ways to treat it is in ways that will allow me to succeed. But I think just that little inkling that I had for so long and I didn't know how to explain it, I would want to tell myself that it'll be figured out. And then for parents quickly, also, I think like, especially for ADHD, it's really important to praise positive behaviors in your kids more than you criticize negative ones, I think, for a kid with ADHD, which can be difficult at times, but I think just that positive reinforcement is so important for maintaining their self-esteem, because also with ADHD, kids tend to have lower self-esteem because of how much they tend to be criticized at school or disciplined more than other kids. So I think that's really important as well.
That kind of goes similar to what Becky was saying, where you needed to keep focusing on all the gifts that you had, because the negatives can kind of take over. And so that's that with the parents, and I guess I think about that for the teachers and us, the support staff too. Okay, thank you, Isabel. So I'm gonna go on to Aiden with that same question.
Yeah, I think if I could go back, I'd talk to a younger me, much younger, I think, and just tell them like, similarly to Isabel and Becky, like the anxiety that comes with, for me, it was note taking and test taking. It will not be gone, but there are ways to help it. And I think I go back and I'd say, you're not dumb and you're not bad at writing and you're not strange. You just, like Isabel said, you're wired differently. And I think I would just encourage myself to find the things I'm good at. Like I've always been good at sports. I've always been athletic. I've always been good at memorization. I enjoy play. And I think I'd focus on that and music and art, things that I really enjoy, just to kind of recenter myself. And then I think I go back and tell the therapist I went to and, just like the process that I went through, like just to tell them like what they should be looking for, because it was a long time of trying to trying to help something that I didn't have necessarily. So it was frustrating because I didn't feel like anything was getting better or helping because we weren't looking for the right thing.
Okay. And maybe I could, while with you, Ada, is just go on to that next question, was there a specific experience or project or moment that made you feel successful with your learning difference?
Yeah, so I can think of a couple, but I think the one where I felt like, hey, I'm talented at something, I'm good at stuff, is when I was actually getting tested for like fine motor skills, dysgraphia, just a bunch of learning differences. And I remember this one exercise we did. The proctor of the test would read me a list of like 7 numbers or something, and I'd have to recite them backwards. And I remember being able to just do it over and over again, and I felt really confident with it because I kept getting it right. And that's when I would think I was like, I can memorize things. It's not my mind that's not processing things. It's that when I try to connect it with writing or with reading, that's where I struggle. And so I think that's where it really shifted from me thinking I was dumb to just being a little bit different, a little bit out of the box.
Yeah, and that's a theme that's coming up with all of you, realizing, yes, you have this intelligence and but that the how the learning difference affected how you first felt about yourself, and then realizing you could overcome that. Yeah. So maybe Isabel, I could go with you for that same question.
Yeah, I think something that comes to mind is pretty shortly after my diagnosis, the same teacher who had actually recommended I get tested, I was in his US history class my sophomore year. And he, to this day, is one of the adults who's had the most positive impact on my life. I did terribly on the first exam of that class, and he didn't dismiss me as a failure. He just offered me support and showed me so much patience. And each year at Headroyce, or your sophomore year, there's a project called the Catalyst for Change Conference, where basically we researched a historical issue that was still present today. And it's with like 70 different schools. It's online. And I researched America's infatuation with fad dieting. And I ended up receiving an award for that project alongside 9 others. And I think that was a big moment for me because I didn't have a lack of confidence in my intelligence, but because of the way they were realized in terms of my academic work, in terms of grades, I did have a lack of confidence in those abilities. And so I think succeeding in that and also doing so well in his class after failing the first exam was a big moment for me. And I felt very successful in my learning difference at that point.
That's great. And having that persistent and determination too with that. And then maybe I'll go to you, Becky, with that same question. Then I have one more left after.
So I'm struggling to think of a specific example, but I would say, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but one of the things I'm good at is like, I'll be, let's say, at an offsite strategy meeting and there's 30 people in the room talking, they're all saying different things, and I can map the themes in my head and then recite it back and say, it seems like there's 6 themes here. And similar to you, Aiden, with your memorization, people like turn to me and they're just like, how did she do that? And so, and also just generally connecting dots. And that comes up a lot. And for me, it's just those places where I can see my value to the team. And maybe I do almost everything else more slowly than others, but that skill actually saves tons of time for the team. Like in terms of its impact, it could save like 2 months of conversation because I just summarized a bunch of things. So I'd say that's one of the places that I see that show up in terms of success.
Great. Thank you, Becky. And then I'm going to stick with you for the last question. And then afterwards, I know there's several questions in the chat that we'll get to after that. So the last question is, what resources have been helpful to you? And such as, I know you mentioned even we met, and several other mentioned like either audiobooks or podcasts.
Yeah, so I have some notes here I have to look at. So generally what I wanted to share on this one was I was thinking about resources and just kind of supports in general. And I categorized them into 3 categories, which is like tactical, just daily tools and practices, emotional. And that's where I was talking about the sense of humor and really stepping back and looking at where our culture or the systems in which we are, or even just our own environment within our home, expectations that our parents have that they don't even know they have based on how they were raised. We're being disciplined for asking basically like, can I listen to music while I study? And they're, no, you can't do that, when actually it really helps. So that kind of emotional piece of just looking at the context and looking at our own emotional response and kind of what goes on in our heads and our hearts around this experience. And then strategic, which is creating conditions for success. like actually saying like that piece around like, okay, what's really hard for me? Like my goal right now is how do I create ease? Like, how do I design a life that brings me ease? Because I've been grinding my whole life to try to like prove something and just because I'm really good at things doesn't mean that I need to do them. Like what brings me joy? Where is ease? So, and actually thinking more strategically about what that looks like and not apologizing for that. So those were my categories, but the actual just like some just quick samples of tools that fit into those different categories or a couple different podcasts that I love that I can put in the chat. One is the Drummer and the Great Mountain that talks about the like hunter versus the farmer. So the farmers being really deliberate and slow and patient, and the hunters needing a dopamine hit and going after like what's exciting, and just framing like that paradigm was super helpful for me. ADHD, How to ADHD is a YouTube channel with a lovely young woman that has all these great little, I listen to her when I'm like getting ready in the morning. And she kind of brings me, I don't know, helps me with like the self-compassion piece. I love Grammarly with some of the dysgraphia stuff. So all my emails at work, everything has an override and is correcting things. And the last one, I have a whole list. The last one is Brain FM, is an app that has certain types of music for different activities. And I probably listen to that app about 6 hours a day at work when I'm not in meetings.
Yeah.
To help me focus.
That's great. And so maybe we could add, some of those things to the chat, or we'll find a way with Sarah and Greg to get that information out. Maybe we could go, thank you, Becky, and then I'll go to Isabel and then Aiden, if you have some resources.
Yeah, I haven't engaged in as many like online resources or podcasts as Becky, but the one that she said that I agree with is How to ADHD. I think it's especially good for even teens who like might just feel like their diagnosis means there's something wrong with them, or they're worried about that side of it, because the channel consistently just enforces the idea that there's nothing wrong with you and it's just about how your brain is different, and even explains in some of the ways in simple terms. And I also think it's a good way to learn about how ADHD is different in girls and women, because the woman whose channel it is, she speaks about that specifically, and also its connection to mental illness in girls and women, which I think is something that's important to explore. So that's the one actual like online resource I have. If I can also mention some study tips, because I know someone asked that. Or I can mention that.
That'd be great. Yes.
Okay. Well, so for me, I think first of all, my environment is the most important thing. And this is something I knew for myself long before my diagnosis, because if my room was dirty, I would clean it for 3 hours instead of doing my work, because I just simply could not. So I think also, if possible, having a space designated for work. Like I will go now in college to an empty classroom, or there's like the most barren room possible, so there's nothing that can distract me. I think also taking really frequent breaks is good, but only when you're in the zone, and I don't exactly know how to explain that, but you're at the point where you can keep going. And I think a good technique for that is like setting a 30-minute timer. And then once you actually start and the timer goes up, you'll want to keep working, because then you're focused in. I also think meeting with your teachers and professors can be helpful, especially because they tend to explain something one way. And if you meet with them individually, they can then explain it in a way that makes more sense to you. And then I also just think establishing a really clear routine has at least helped me, because when I know what I have to do and I have certain times for everything, it's also just I'm very meticulous, so it might not work for some people, but there's not room then for me to go procrastinate, because it's almost like it's habit at this point. And so I don't know, I think that's what's helped me the most.
And do you get the similar accommodations at college that you got at Het Royce?
Yes, so I have time and a half. I have distraction reduced environment, which it is for anyone who has accommodations anyways, because it's like your exams in a separate place. And then I have no Scantrons, which I also had for ACT and SAT.
Thank you, Isabel. And I'll go now to Aiden with that same question about resources that you.
Yeah, the first one that comes to mind actually is, it's not exactly about my learning difference, it's about my anxiety, but it was a book called like The Worry Monster, I think it was. And I would read it, I'd read it with my mom every night, and it would have things like draw what you're worried about. And it helped me work through like grounding myself in reality and not worry about that. Um, and then I'd say teachers were a huge resource for me. Just talking to teachers was super big because they're always understanding. You know, there's this fear that they're going to be like, "Oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to help you with that." But I've never had anyone like that. And maybe I'm just lucky, but I think teachers are huge because they understand kids. Um, and accommodations like typing, pretty much everything has been huge. Getting time and a half, getting no scantrons, like Isabel said, is huge because I think one thing about the Scantron is, at least for me, it's tracking my answer on the paper over to a different paper and back and forth, and you end up either overthinking every answer you put down, or you start messing up the bubbles and the order, and then you eventually realize that you've messed up 30, 40 in a row, and it just spirals from there. Oh, and I think for people with dyslexia or dysgraphia, audiobooks, just listening to books, is huge. I used to hate books, hate reading, because I couldn't do it efficiently. I couldn't enjoy a story because I'd get so mentally tired and drained that it felt like I was doing work instead of relaxing. I discovered audiobooks because my mom would play them in the car, and I got into like so many more stories, and I was able to enjoy it more, and not have to worry about being able to do it.
Yeah. Wow, that's wonderful. Thank you all for answering those questions and offering the resource. So now I want to jump into, and I don't know if Sarah or if other people too were reading the questions in the chat, because I got a little bit, I was listening, I didn't look at all the chats, but I can jump into one that I saw from the beginning. It was, it says, and this is for the panel, how did your bilingual education affect your experience? And I guess that would be more for Aiden and Isabel. And then how did you navigate state testing at EB or beyond? I think we kind of touched on that. And first we need to do the first one about the bilingual. How did the bilingual education affect you? I don't know if like Aiden or...
I can start. I started learning French when I was really young because we moved to France. It was like when I was like 3 or 4 or something like that. And I was learning French and it became kind of second nature to me, this French. And I think that I think it opens up. I've heard this from somebody who studied it, but it opens up like more neural connections or something like that. But I think that going through the bilingual process, I had more classes than everyone. So we'd have a class in English, and then we'd have a similar class in French because they had to balance it. And I think that more than anything enabled me to like juggle material and classes better. And I think that really set me up well for high school, where different teachers, different classrooms, super different environments. I think I was able to adjust to that because of the bonus classes that we had at EB.
And are you still taking a language at St. Mary's?
I was last year, but I really didn't enjoy taking French at my school, just because it was so different than EB and so different than the environment at EB, and it didn't feel quite as the same. So I didn't enjoy it. So I've stopped taking that now, but I still speak French with people I know from France, my friends at school at St. Mary's that also went to EB, my sister sometimes. I want to keep it because I think it's a really interesting language.
Okay. Yeah, and it is that for those of you here that at St. Mary's, actually most high schools, it would be the same. Like at Head Roy's, you're starting to learn French as a second language, so it's much different than at EB were teaching in French, not teaching in French per se. So Isabel, do you want to speak to also like what was your bilingual, how the bilingual education affected your experience?
With my learning disability specifically.
Yeah, like around maybe the ADHD.
I think, I mean, at the EBH, because I didn't know about it, looking back, I think if anything, it maybe helped because it's just, I mean, speaking another language is stimulating different parts of your brain. I think though, I did notice in high school, I remember specifically with my French classes, I had a lot of issues when I was practicing for the AP exam, which ended up going well, but it was like I would freeze because I hadn't been in that bilingual environment for a bit. And so I had difficulty, I guess, accessing whatever part of my brain was storing the language, and I would just be paralyzed and unable to do it. But I think, yeah, I mean, like what Aiden said, if anything, like once I got to high school, the types of different classes at EB was a good way to get used to the kind of schedule you have in high school. And there were other challenges I faced with the transition to high school just because of things that kids at Head Royce had learned in their middle school that I hadn't, but that didn't really relate to bilingualism. But that definitely was a struggle for me, like math wise and in terms of studying strategies that had been taught to those kids, but that doesn't relate to the language. So.
Okay. And I think I know some other people, Sarah and Greg, if you've been looking through the questions too, I try to get.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the questions had to do with specifically for Becky and Isabel about techniques for managing and overcoming procrastination.
I can start. I would say Isabel talked about time blocking. So just setting a time, like saying, I'm just going to sit here and do this, even if it's 15 minutes. And I forget there's some specific method. I can't remember what it is right now. I read some articles. So, but it's like 15 minutes or 25 minutes or some number. And so I started doing that. I'd set a timer, and it's almost like the voice in my head's like, you can do anything for 25 minutes. And when I started practicing that, I realized that there was just more like anxiety, and like I got more clear about what the procrastination was about. It was like the perfectionism or anxiety or just like this like knowing and dreading that it was going to be hard because I didn't really want to do it. And so I would just kind of like ground myself like, okay, I'm going to spend 15 minutes. But then I'd like also just step back and be like, why do I feel icky? And it's like, I feel icky because I just know this is going to be hard and not be fun. But then as Isabel said, once my mind would like get wrapped around something and I actually start making progress, the next thing you know, I'm just like, you know, and then I have like way more than I needed in the first place. And then the other thing I had written down the other day, I was thinking about this, is I've also gotten really clear about, and I do think this is the difference between school and other settings where you have to do things. That is, I'm really clear that I have a bunch of things that I need to do that are hard, that I admit to myself now, because I'm clear about kind of why I'm procrastinating, that they feel hard, and I'm choosing to do them. Like this is a choice that I'm making to do this. So I feel more like empowered around it. And then I'm like, all right, I'm making this choice. And I say that with my son too. I'll say, you know, you made the choice to take these AP classes, or you made the choice to do this, and you don't have to do this. But just kind of giving him his power back in it. And that helps with the procrastination too, for me.
Isabel, any tips and tricks in terms of procrastination and techniques you can share for some of the parents?
Yeah, I don't know if it was the same article that Becky read as well, but I read one that, because I was really struggling to catch up recently, and I had all different kinds of assignments of different lengths and emails to respond to. And so what it told me to do was set a timer for 15 minutes or write everything down first, which I always do anyways. I always write it all down. And then I also always star the things that are most important that need to get done, or highlight whatever, just because visually I need it to pop out so I can really see what I have to do. And then I set a timer, and you can do fast things like answer emails or easy things that I tend to put off always too, but they don't take as much brain power. And then take a little break, like 5 minutes, and then set another timer for 30 minutes and choose a bigger, more daunting assignment. And I think also setting the timer, I know I keep going back to that, but it's really helpful because then I just feel like, let me just try, let me at least look at it. And then once I get into it, it makes it feel less daunting. And I also think being forgiving with yourself, or if this is for your students or your kids, sometimes it's not going to work, because you can't just decide I'm going to do this work and it's going to go great every time, because sometimes it won't, and sometimes you literally won't be able to do it, and that's okay too. But I think also the negative self-talk every time, if that's what it goes to, then you start to associate the work with that negativity as well. And then also another study tip, I don't know if this goes into this exact question, but I wanted to add it because I've been doing this for a while, but I can't listen to music with words at all for studying. But what I can do is, for me, I like classical music, and now I associate it with doing my work. And so even just putting my earbuds in and starting to listen to it, it puts me in that zone. So that's really helpful for me as well.
Great.
One other question that we didn't really cover, although you all kind of mentioned it, and if any of you are comfortable kind of sharing a little bit about your medication experience and what that means and how it's sort of affected things in your life. Anybody who wants to chime in there?
I can. I take Adderall and Zoloft. I take the Zoloft for OCD and Adderall for ADHD, and I started taking both around my junior year of high school. During quarantine is when especially the OCD got really bad. And I've done therapy in the past, and for for OCD first, I guess. I had done therapy in the past, and OCD also, it kind of comes in waves throughout your life. So it was getting worse again, and I let it get way worse than I should have, because I didn't like to talk about that type of thing. But when I finally did, I got a psychiatrist, and they suggested starting medication. My parents were really hesitant about it at first, but I've never feared it as much as just seen it as something that could help me. And I understand the fear of it changing your personality, especially with ADHD medication. But I think, especially for OCD, it's a little different because it's an SSRI. That is something that I really have realized helps, like, makes life good and manageable to live, because sometimes therapy isn't enough. And I think for ADHD, it's a little different because there are more side effects that can alter kids' personalities, especially. And I think you have to be patient with trying out different ones, which can be difficult as well. But again, for me, Adderall works. It doesn't change my personality. I don't take it during the summertime. I don't take it every day, but that is another, and arguably for me, the most important way I can succeed academically. And it's not something I feel like I'm going to need for the rest of my life, but right now, it's something that's allowing me to excel and enjoy my studies and still have fun and have a social life. So
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. That's a great answer.
Yeah.
And anybody else want to chime in on the medication thing?
I'm pausing to see if Aiden wants to talk. I'm happy to. So when I was first diagnosed, I saw a psychiatrist for a bit and felt kind of, I guess, I'm not sure how to say this, but unheld.
Mhm.
Like, he was sort of like, what do you want? Like, as if I knew what I needed. And I felt kind of, and I was hesitant. I'm really into holistic healing and trying supplements and trying all these different things. And so it's like taking the medication is just kind of counterintuitive, for like, just doesn't feel right for me. So I really needed to feel like I was partnering with somebody who was helping me efficiently kind of find my way. And I didn't define that at first. So I spent, I would say 3 years working pretty intensely on a couple different health things in the functional medicine space, really trying to cure my migraines that I have, but also like while I'm at it and I'm paying, you $150 an hour to talk to you, can you help me with my ADHD? So I've tried like every expensive supplement on the planet and all these different things, and it really didn't make a difference. And so right now I'm in a job that requires, I think, more sustained executive function that is a good fit for me. And the stress and kind of the anxiety and that overwhelm that brings on took me back to trying medication again. Unfortunately, and I think Sarah mentioned this at the beginning. So disclaimer, I work for Kaiser Permanente, but I've had great experiences and not so great experiences, but this is a great experience. I've had an incredible experience with their ADHD program where I meet with someone every 4 weeks, and they're really focused and ask me great questions. And I've felt really supported. And then more recently, have added, so right now I'm taking Lexapro and SSRI. First I started the ADHD medication, the long-acting Adderall. I'm not sure I have the name exactly right. But I can't take, I feel like I'm not I don't have it perfected yet. I feel like I'm not taking enough. But I'm afraid every time I take a little more, I feel anxious. And so now, just recently in the last couple of weeks, they said, let's try an SSRI and see if we can drop that anxiety a little bit and see if we can bring that ADHD medication up. Like Isabel said, I don't know that I'll take the medication forever. I feel like, gosh, I hope once I get in a rhythm and it's working, I will definitely keep taking it while I'm in this job, while I'm trying to demand things of myself, or if I were in school, absolutely. But I hope someday to shift, to pivot my career again, to put myself in a position where I'm more at ease without the medication, to bring that back down. But I'm really grateful for it. And I definitely, in the contrast of experiences with the team you have, and just being really thoughtful and really listening makes a world of difference.
Thank you so much for tackling that. There's a couple other questions in here that I want to be respectful of time. One question, and I think this is more for you, Aiden, about the typing. At what age is it possible to start almost exclusively typing instead of writing by hand? What is the best way to get kids in elementary school accustomed to typing?
And also, I
sorry.
think if any of our educators on the call want to jump in too, that's fine as well. But Aiden, since you
I will say,
specifically to
my
that.
mom made me take a typing class in the 8th grade. It's the best thing. I hated it at the time. I couldn't stand it. Teacher was like a real dork, but it worked out great. And I'm a great typist. So that's
Aiden.
Aiden.
Yeah. So I'm actually not sure what age you can start exclusive typing. I started in I think it was like end of 7th grade, beginning of 8th grade, but I believe that I could have had it at least since 6th grade, maybe even earlier than that, because we had access to iPads and stuff in elementary school. But I think it's probably possible pretty early on in the learning experience. For the getting kids like accustomed to typing, I remember at the EB lower school, Monsieur Labadie, or like Manu as we knew him, we had this class with him where we would like start to learn how iPads worked and typing and all that. And we were 2nd grade, I think, and that got me like, I knew how iPads worked, I knew how keyboards worked, I knew how to type essentially. And then I forget what grade it was. I think it was 6th grade, but we took a typing class. And that helped us just kind of learn the basics of where to put your hands, and then you kind of run with it. And my grade, especially, I don't know if any other grades, but my grade especially got into something called Nitro Type, which is it's kind of a little game on just online where it gives you basically like a short little paragraph that you have to type, and the faster you type, the faster your little car goes. and you're racing other people that are also typing. And we really got into that just to see how fast we could type and all that. And I think that helped not only me, but my entire grade. I think that that really benefited us. And then I'm trying to think, because I know there's other resources we used. We used some kind of typing program, but I think it's just like, if you start early and you kind of just like accustom kids to using iPads like EB did, I think it ends up benefiting them just in the long run.
Thank you so much, Aiden. Thank you. And if anything comes to mind, after the conversation, we'll be posting this and we can share resources. We have a whole document, sort of a learning differences Google Doc that we share out. So we can connect afterwards. But there's another question here, but this might be best answered by one of the members of the student support team. It's around how can parents work with EB for support around some of these things. And it's different maybe in the elementary and the middle school, but
I mean, I would say the first would be at the lower school, and then please, other people from the SST team, please chime in as well to talk with your child's teacher, the primary teacher in that grade, and that would be the first level, and then within that we have referral sources to go within our student support team. At the middle school, because the child has so many different classes and teachers, you'd still work, I would say, with the teacher's advisor. You work with me as the counselor. I should say also at the lower school, there's the counselor, there's the Benedict, who's also learning specialist, there's Danielle. So there's a lot of us professional support staff that you could go to as well at both the lower school and the middle school.
Yeah, if I may, we go through the referral, and it's interesting because ADHD, to get a diagnosis of ADHD, it is a medical diagnosis. So sometimes just a psychoeducational assessment is not going to give you a diagnosis of ADHD. So we kind of try, we start to be on top of all the assessments and how to support and to guide as well as we can the families. And like Milan said, the first step is to talk to your child teacher. And then we go from there. We go in a class, we talk with you, we talk with the teachers, we gather data, and we move forward. And the goal of the SST is really to support anybody and to really emphasize. I love how Becky is always talking about her superpowers. And that's really the shift that we really want to put forward. Every student has so many superpowers, and sometimes it's true that the school setting. It was interesting to hear Isabel saying I was a pleaser at school, so I didn't have big problems in elementary school, because that's true. I was her teacher for 2 years, and even if she liked to talk, I wasn't really suspecting anything. And so really this kind of night like tonight, opening the discussion, being awareness is key, I think, to best support our students. And I wanted just to mention, I think Isabel was in the grade that started typing in 4th grade, and you got really good skills. So as early as 4th grade, it can be like a weekly, challenge to type for 45 minutes a week or something like that.
I have a response to something I saw in the chat around the reaction of friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to share, I think still to this day, there are people in my life that don't believe me that I have ADHD. And or they're kind of like, doesn't everybody have that? Or we're all distracted. And I think it's really hard to believe sometimes when people present like Isabel and I both described, like very organized, and people pleasers, either gender, right? Or performing well. Like I've always done pretty well in school, which was more reflective of my effort than, than anything. And so I just wanted to say that that was a response. And so I think part of like that, and then what would you say to parents or teacher or whatever? It's more just like, I don't know, giving people the benefit of the doubt around all the things. Because I would say from experience, like I know sometimes I appear stubborn because I'm not doing things I'm supposed to be doing, or flaky because I don't manage time well, and I'm kind of like doing 50 things when I'm supposed to be getting out the door. But really, and I'm doing this with my son who's 16, which is like, again, the sense of humor. And really what's most important to me is that he leaves my house emotionally intact, regardless of what grades he ends up with, or whether he goes to woodworking school or UC Santa Barbara, which is his dream, and just having a sense of humor and just really focusing on the how. Okay, we got to get this done. Do you really want to, are we going to do this? Okay, we're going to do this. How can we do this? And so and believing people when they say, I really need to do it this way, or whatever.
All right.
Thank you,
Well,
Greg.
thank you, Becky. Thank you, Aiden. Thank you, Isabel. Oh, we have one more question. Isabel, other Isabel.
The other Isabel. So first of all, thank you so much. That was extremely enlightening. I loved it. And I just wanted to add something because I'm using a resource with Leon, who has been diagnosed with ADHD and dysgraphia. I'm going to see an educational therapist, and it's absolutely wonderful. I love it. It really helped incredibly, his memory and also his confidence, and just the confidence made a huge difference in his day-to-day life at school. So I want, if somebody is interested in this, it costs a little bit of money, but it goes a long way, I think. And the other thing I wanted to add also is, so I teach at UC Berkeley. I teach third and fourth year, and I'm also have never been diagnosed, but I can see myself in Isabel actually mostly, and also Becky. And I just wanted to add that at the university level, what's work is the grit, and being smart, that's obviously something you need, but working hard, it's something you need more. And all these kids that have all these learning differences, they work hard, so they're going to succeed for sure. That's all I wanted to say.
That's beautiful,
That's
Isabel.
beautiful. Thank you, Isabel. You may have noticed that posted a link to our Google Doc, which we have, I'll admit, haven't updated in a while, but we're going to put a recording of this in the Google Doc so you can watch it again. There's also a couple of recordings of some of our earlier Zoom panels where we've spoken to specialists and helpers and people who are involved in different levels of neurodiversity. So we encourage you. And if you share resources, we'll post those as well. There's resources podcasts. We'll be adding to that after this conversation. And certainly, really, thank you again, Aiden, Isabel, Becky, Milan. Thank you for steering the ship.
Well, may I also just say, as a mother, Aiden and Isabel, I mean, you were remarkable, both of you. And your parents must be so proud of you. And it was just dreamy to just hear from you. It's just wonderful. So especially thank you. And Becky, I mean, you're just so introspective, and your 360 perspective is so valuable between you, not only are you experiencing and living life with a learning difference, but you're a mother. And so you have a really unique perspective. in the conversation tonight. So just, we're so grateful to all of you for
Yes,
participating.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot. We appreciate your participation. This has been probably our most well-attended LDSG panel. So that that makes us feel good because we always have the fear going in that what if nobody comes? So we really appreciate that. Appreciate all the participation. And with that, we'll say, have yourself a wonderful evening. Good night.
Thank you, Gael. Thank you, Milan.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
all of you.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Good night. Good night.